Good evening, everybody. Welcome to all of you. So nice to see so many faces here for our first faculty talk of the week. My name is Dustin Ross. For those of you who maybe haven't been here before, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the summer program manager here at the Fine Arts Work Center. We have a great lineup for you tonight. We're going to hear from poets Porsha Olayiwola, Oliver de la Paz, who will both read from their work, and printmaker Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas, who will give a presentation. We'll then invite them all back up to the stage for a Q&A with you all. But before we begin, a bit of housekeeping and other items of interest. Thursday, we have an exciting day for you. Mark Adams will be leading a walk through Provincetown at 1:30 p.m., where he'll share his vast knowledge about the natural and cultural history of Provincetown and the Outer Cape. You'll meet out here on the deck, and it's really not to be missed. It's really, really fascinating. Then that evening, as you know, is student night. It's the gem of the week, and it's something I look forward to all week long. If you haven't done so already, please, for those of you in the writing workshops, you can sign up to read in the student sign-up sheet that's over in the student lounge. You will not regret it, I promise you. And heads up, we've just relaunched our online program, FOC Online. We have a bunch of great offerings available right now, and you can check them all out at foconline.org. We're particularly excited about one of these offerings, which allows summer poetry students to continue the magic of your workshop. This FOC Online 4-week workshop is specifically designed for poets taking workshops this summer, taught by MP Carver, the facilitator of our oh-so-popular online submit-a-thons. It'll meet once a week during August. Jennifer Jean will be emailing poetry students at the end of the week to provide details, so be on the lookout for that. After this workshop, after tonight's reading, Oliver will be signing books at the back. We will be getting copies of Porsha's book this week, probably delivered on Thursday, so we will have it available to you to get a copy before you leave. Books by other members of this year's faculty are for sale in our bookstore and at the back of the room, as well as some of our brand new, newly designed FOC merchandise, including t-shirts, notebooks, and tote bags. Be sure to check all that out. Our gallery, the Hudson D. Walker Gallery, will be open after the event. Right now, we're showing our amazing summer exhibition called To Move a Mountain, curated by past FOC fellow Cody Brown, and features work by former FOC fellows. The proceeds of all this work will go to support FOC programs, so be sure and check that out after the event if you haven't strolled through already. We'd like to give a shout out to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod Phi Foundation, who support our summer public programming. Restrooms are located down the hall. For any who need it, we have assisted listening devices at the back of the room. Please ask myself or Miracle to help you with one of those if you need. And finally, everybody, please do us all a favor and turn off your cell phone, turn it to silent. And with that, I would like to invite one of Porsha's students, Tia Walker, to the stage, who will introduce Porsha.
Hi, everyone. So I first encountered Porsha Olayiwola the way that many have, on Button Poetry through her electric performances. And as a spoken word poet, I watched Angry Black Woman and Capitalism for the first time in high school and was instantly mesmerized by the words that she spit on those stages. And I was especially drawn to how her poems spoke directly to Black life, both the loud and the quiet parts, the corners of the south side of Chicago, the heaviness and lightness of family, the corner store, the bus stop, the kitchen, the unspoken words between glances at the gas station, the microaggressions that are really macro, the electric slide that is never just a dance. Her work doesn't just describe, it affirms. Porsha names what we've known in silence, the language that permeates our veins. And when I studied at Spelman as an exchange student, I read her piece, Black Spells, and wrote an afterpiece as I applied for a poetry course back at Dartmouth. And now I'm here, and the creative elements of my brain are craving a space like this. Space to be challenged and sharpened and seen. And I've admired Porsha for years, and not just because she's the Poet Laureate of Boston, or because her work has appeared everywhere from the Boston Globe to Netflix, but because she shimmers, sometimes, always, on the page and beyond it. Porsha Olayiwola is an individual World Poetry Slam champion and the author of the collection I Shimmer Sometimes Too. She is the current Poet Laureate for the City of Boston. She's a 2020 Academy of American Poets Poet Laureate Fellow. She's also the Assistant Professor of Poetry at Emerson College. And her work can be found in or forthcoming with Triquarterly Magazine, Black Warrior Review, the Boston Globe, Essence Magazine, Redivider, Split This Rock, the NBA, the Academy of American Poets, Netflix, the Rumpus, Wilderness Press, the Museum of Fine Arts, and elsewhere. So it's an absolute honor to welcome someone whose voice has helped shape mine, someone who reminds us that survival is resistance, that resistance can be ritual, and that poetry is not just pieces on pages, but legacy. Please join me in welcoming the phenomenal Porsha Olayiwola.
Wow, that was the best intro ever. Thank you so much, Tia. I am honored, excited, and terrified always to be reading poems before y'all or before a group in general. I just want to clarify, I'm the former Poet Laureate of the city of Boston. Our new laureate is Emmanuel Opanya-Bois, who's an incredible poet. You know, those who get it, the girls that get it. I'm just clarifying 20 minutes. Is that true? That's a thumbs up. Let me set my timer. You know, I always, I've been teaching here the last 3-4 years, and so I'm always like, oh my God, what did I read last time? And what am I gonna read this time? And then I always spend the day editing, so all of the poems are brand new, huh? That's exciting. With the exception of a few, I suppose. I guess I'm just going to, go with what the spirit is suggesting. Earlier this year, I was asked to contribute to something that is reference to the Golden Record. People remember or recall the Golden Record. It was like a record of human activity sent to the moon, I want to say in the 70s. And there was an arts group in London that was doing something similar, or a recollection of today from several artists from different countries. And for some reason, picked me to talk about this country and where we are right now. So I'm going to start there with a warning for all of the current events that are happening right now. It's called In Alignment with the Women Before Me, after June Jordan, after Audre Lorde. We must speak about the cities that have become cemeteries at the glitch of a finger. We must speak about the families and all their generations, dead and blotted out like a rotting stain. We must speak about the sixth grader who ended her life for fear she would be dragged back across a border. We must speak about the soldier who set himself on fire in front of the embassy in protests of genocide. We must speak about the drones like an army of birds, teaching the kindergartners to count by counting ghosts. We must speak about the woman in the pink headscarf walking and then carried by men in masks and thrown in an unmarked government van. We must speak about the Palestinian man arrested by a country of criminals, his wife reduced to a puddle of pleas. We must speak about the brick of the university sidewalk that does not come clean of blood pouring from the bodies of students. We must speak about Amber Thurman, who died 2 weeks after the abortion ban because the doctors feared for their lives. We must speak about the doctors dragged from courtrooms and the women dragged from courtrooms and the queers dragged from courtrooms and the courtrooms a cemetery. We must speak about the Navajo man detained and questioned about his citizenship. We must speak about the man berated on television, ridiculed and under attack for defending his people who were ridiculed and under attack. We must speak about the slew of fires and floods. The whole education department banned away the cities that have become cemeteries at the hands of men who are religious to the gods they have become. We must speak about the land of fangs and blades, the worlds with hands reaching like the claw of a hanger, a border closing in on our throat, a gag and muzzle around our mouth of sugar. Everything we marched for got marched over with an order. They have made this a lawless land, so we need the law of revolution. This dark comedy of countries, this shaky, sinister laugh of leaders pledging to carry us to the casket if we let them. Silence is an opportunist. Silence is a violet pooling on cement. Let me be clear. We have no choice but to color our palms red. Let me be clear. We must invocate the drums. We must incite the ancestors. We must go out singing. We must go down swinging a dagger. We must go out screaming in a fight for our lives, our nails and knuckles clogged with the flesh of our enemies who have made our cities into graveyards. We must go out biting the neck of white supremacy. We must go out gauging out the eyes of fascism with our teeth, mouthful of righteousness, mouthful of blood, skin, and cartilage. We must ravish, triumphant, oh Lord, in order to survive these brutes we have had to become. I've been trying to write less about history and more about family, and I guess that's still a way of writing about history. So these next poems I'm still testing out. Is it true? What is this? Oh, this is called Many Men right now, after the 50 Cent song, you know, Many Men. Okay, all right. Many Men. Mother has loved many who seem to be entangled in the throat of a higher power. Men who were in debt to their gods with their laws. Her first husband, a blue-mooned man who loved the lick of finer things. My sister's father, who kept the distance of a cliff, always out of state or always in the state penitentiary. Mother learned not to cry over men who spilt and split like diamonds. Her second husband was a boarder, leased to our family with immigration and under contract. Father, who was a decadent man, who laid mother on a bed of promises fulfilled, who bought mother a house. Father, who was sent overseas like a parcel. Father, a blackberry beaten man around the bush of this country. And then there were the many who came after. Johnny, the thief, Michael, the magician, and only now, Larry, a sweet gentleman, as syrupy and southern as peach cobbler. He and her, high school friends, turned late life lovers. He and her, retired in the heat of a desert. A man and companion to her in their old age. Mother, still vibrant and reaching and laughing. Larry, now sick and frail bones, holds on to Patricia, my mother, for dear life, grasping her fingers like a newborn. That's why I have the laptop here, because I kind of love the rush of it. Yeah, I've been trying to write more prose poems. I'm not a prose girly. I've been like stuck in many forms, specifically the sonnet and the contrapuntal for the last several years. But yeah, I'm just getting back into the prose girly. We'll see. Right now, this is called Family Lore. Grandma Bessie. I keep trying to write the poem about Grandma Bessie and the shotgun, but I can hardly recall how the story goes, who the barrel is pointed toward, and whether or not an empty bottle makes a chef of the hardwood floor. It happens on the South Side, right off 62nd and Ellis Avenue, right down the street from Fisk Elementary, where all the cousins on my mother's side assembly lined into school. Some facts cannot be disputed. These are those. I digress. The story goes like this. Granddad came home late, Maybe it was the die, not as in death, but as in dice. A vice, an addiction to another woman or to bottles. Heard there were many, many bottles. Heard he drank like a fish. Heard granddad was to liquor what amphibians are to water. A newt treading a pitcher of clear Kool-Aid. I digress. Either way, he came home past the hour of decency, sauntering in like a salamander, stumbling in without the appropriate care required of a husband who was the father of 9. Grandma Bessie, our beautiful matriarch, was lying on the couch, or maybe she lurked beside the door. Either way, the house was as dimly lit as sin, and he could not make out the shadow of her. I don't know who came running in after the pair of them. Maybe it was the 9 kids, and unless I think I'm too grown, I mean my aunts and uncles, who were just kids then, sprouting up like dandelions from the beds they shared, or maybe it was a nest of nosy neighbors, or perhaps a drove of dirty cops who would rush to the wreckage of sound. Either way, my mother tells me Grandma Bessie wasn't no clown. She wasn't no boo-boo the fool. She was an army of a woman who didn't take no mess. Grandma wasn't to be caught dead with the man thinking he had her, thinking he ought to have her. When power slips like silk in the slim of night, the story ends the same way a birth begins, with everyone alive and screaming. She did not shoot him. Some facts can be disputed. These aren't them. She fired a warning shot, a cautionary tale bolting through a chamber, the double-barrel shotgun aimed like eyes toward heaven, and then a twitch toward hell. It's the story so I had wrote that poem after I think I had been thinking about it for several years, just like how to tell the story, and decided to write it, read it out loud once, and then maybe 2 weeks later, I just recently opened up a bookstore, is the sub part to the story. But I was in the store, and this woman came in, and she was, I assumed, unhoused, and maybe having a mental health issue, right? And she begins to scream things out. And I'm like, ma'am, you might have to leave if you keep cursing specifically. And then she starts to just yell at me and tell me, your grandmother says to stop telling all my business, and goes on. And then I got totally freaked out. And then so I wrote another poem about my grandmother. And right now it's called A Woman in a Head Wrap Walks into the Store and Announces Your Grandmother Wants You to Stop Telling All of Her Business. Forget everything I mentioned about my grandfather. Turns out he was a pillar of sugar, a simple syrup man willing to give a limb for whom he loved. What I said at the break of dawn about my grandmother, however, still stands. Take this with a sliver of salt, as I am only a figment of their inevitable future, memory dancing with their past. The myth of my lineage is second migration. We are north of the Mississippi, but still very much so south side. Some of the family, as told by my mother, landed in Grand Rapids. Me and my cousins and their mothers and my uncles and my aunts and their kids and our grandmother ended up in Chicago. I'm told by the tellers that my grandmother babysat the toddlers. I am a balcony baby, lunging the banister, a lookout, watchful for my mother to turn the block. This story, though, happens before I was born, back with my mother's first husband, before they were divorced and before they were married and before my sister was a child inside wedlock. It was their first date. None of my business, of course, but here I am, a beggar to the god of genealogy, eager to learn the landscape before my time of arrival. Anyway, they are sitting on a timeless piece of furniture, centerpiece to the Black family lore, my grandmother's floral plastic covered couch. My grandmother was known to drink like a horse when led to a basin of booze, and the story goes that on this particular night, she bolted up the stairs, drunk as Eddie Kane Jr. in the Five Heartbeats, yelling for her double-barrel shotgun. She said somebody had put their own life in danger by meddling with hers. In the lounge downstairs, where the lights were dim enough to avoid eye contacts, the bartender told her, I guess, she could not have her last call, so Granny jolted the stairs to their two-flat apartment and came through the door shooting for her shotgun, which was, I am told, hidden under the sofa like a litter of addiction swept under an heirloomed rug. My mother jumped up and pushed herself against the wall, but my sister's father must have been too at ease, too estranged in a stranger's home to recognize incoming danger. He did not move, and before his knees could unbuckle, I am told, my grandmother, with a strength only our matriarch could wield, lifted the entire floral plastic cover couch with him still sitting and slid it across the wooden floor. Granny grabbed her shotgun and fleeted down the stairs before Uncle Meatball could run from his bedroom fast enough to stop her. I appreciate the claps and letting me try out these poems on you all. Well. No, okay, all right, this is my last piece. It's relatively long, and I'm always trying to figure out what to do with it. We're working on full manuscripts in the class this week, and this has kind of been like an anchor piece in mine. It's after Bridget Kelly, and it's called Song. 1859. Consider, there was a lover dangling from ropes in a tree. Also want to give a warning for violence against Black folk, and specifically Black queer folks. Song, 1859. Consider, there was a lover dangling from ropes in a tree. All summer the lover hungered, and those who witnessed her hum felt a long ringing ache rotting the canals of their throats. The hearers thought the hum came from a vengeful humming, bird or a childless mother, never being able to decipher the difference between the two. Whenever the singing began, the townsfolk sat in trance and stared off into the amber-colored walls of their homes. With summer waning, the lover swung side to side, and from afar, it looked as though the lover saw out unto a mausoleum built of jagged stones, beneath which lay another songstress, who was the lynched lover's lover. Someone's son had murdered both women. It wasn't as clean as he had considered. The lovers fought and struggled hard like warriors, or as a goat would, and still the son finished, flogged both women with a cowhide, and hung one in a tree and stoned the other in the town circle. One lay stoned at the post, and the other appended high hung from a tree. The mouth did not move, but the woman cried out for her woman. The lips did not part, but the lover called out for her love. They longed for each other, and the longing grew into mourning, and the mourning swelled loud and obese between them until it pulled a ballad right from their sockets, and the ballad flew toward the other like a cast of bees. The lovers sang loudly at first, and then lightly, long and low, until winter entered with a darkness that would freeze the land, and with frost came silence. The hymn stopped. The women beloved each other. The women belonged to each other. The taller, named Tilda, and the plumper, Sweet Bess. Sweet Bess was given the name in spite of the sweat honeying her skin. Tilda was namesake from the vein of a ship. Cotilda was the hold in which the two women, not then lovers, were held and hauled. The women lived shacked at far ends of the plantation, and each moon, half full or otherwise, Sweet Bess would flock the night like a seagull or a sparrow or an arrow to spend her slumber with Tilda. The lovers held and hummed. Love called out for her lovers. The hymn was a martial and longing, a warrior's chorus, a lover's lament. It was this lament that first led them to each other within the hold. The ship was black, wet, and rang with many tongues to detangle. And because this was so, Tilda, in order to speak her grief, sang so sweet, it soured the ears of the captain and crew. Messy, messy, macarad, messy, messy, macarad. Sweet Bess could no longer hear the terror, only the song of distance, of home, of longing. Sweet Bess, who had not spoken since before on board and since before the holding within the castle's quarters, parted her lips and hymned Tilda's hum. And together, even with the cemetery, they lived right through the center of the ship's passage and knew they were the other's reason for seeing the moon, waned, waxed, crescented, otherwise once more. The women were inseparable, joined by the canals of their throats. And because Sweet Bess, her throat, like a great gorge, had called to her God, the two were sewed to the same master's son, a boy with teeth. And even when the teeth touched each of them, as they did each hour the sky turned the color of blackened berries, what mattered was that they teethed each other, skin cotton soft yet swelling like taffy in the sun, a puddle of want each night in each of them. When the lovers kissed, their tongues swayed a ballad, and one night when the moon had waxed someone saw the women by the stream, washing and singing a hymn too sweet of salves. And so he hurried to harm the women. The lovers tied them each on a post, the master or his son, upset that the women found pleasure in each other and at all took them both. Consider the master and his son a perversion. Consider the master and his son a thirst flooding at the tunnel of the lovers' throats. He had imagined them to do with as he wished, and so he whipped the women, whistling as they hymned, and hung them, and poured sugar into their blood so each wound would call a cast of bees or a swarm of hummingbirds to peck at their spine. The sugar would crystallize, a mound of gems in each wound. What he did not know was that the women had been shipmates. They had been here because of the other. The son did not know their hymns sang in a tongue only for each other, but he would be taught to consider the tune a cleaving like winter. He would be taught to stop in high summer, unsure if he heard the breeze or a choir or a swarm of pecking hummingbirds, but it was only his blood coursing under the sheath of skin like a flood. There was a hymn, a hum, a morning murmur, and then finally a spiritual, a strong, sweet, sinful spiritual. It was not a song of warriors, but of women stolen from home or longing or ocean. The sin wasn't a sad hymn. No, it was so vengeful, vengefully nectarous. The women would sing on, flogging the canals like a cast of humming bees. Sweet, sweet nectar, if you listen. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Porsha, for that wonderful reading, and Tia for that fabulous introduction. Next, please join me in welcoming one of Oliver's students, Lynn Vitti, to the stage to introduce Oliver de la Paz.
Good evening. Let me try this out. Can you hear me? Good. I had the pleasure of meeting Oliver de la Paz about a year and a half ago at a gathering for Poet Laureates of cities and towns in central and eastern Massachusetts. That day, he read a poem which I absolutely loved then and love now, called Autism Screening Questionnaire, Social Interaction Difficulties. I then, last summer, read this collection, the Diaspora Sonnets, in August. And then I read it again, and then I read it again. And it made me really want to come to Falk for this workshop. Oliver grew up in a place far from here in the Philippines, emigrated to the US when he was 6 months old with his family, grew up in Ontario, Oregon. He's taught at the College of the Holy Cross since 2016 and a number of other places before that. And he is Poet Laureate of Worcester, Massachusetts. He lives with his family in the small town of Holden near Worcester with their 3 sons and their 2 Bernedoodles, whose pictures we see every day as the screen background. Oliver has won many poetry prizes and awards, including a National Endowment for the Humanities Creative Writing Work Fellowship. He is the author of 6 poetry collections. He's a founding member of Kundiman, an organization promoting and supporting Asian American poets since 2002. He's obsessed with gardening, and he pinched the suckers off his tomato plants before heading to Provincetown. In our workshop, he continually challenges us with complex assignments, encourages everyone to speak if they wish to, offers his own assessment of our drafts, but always after checking first to see if we're comfortable with that or interested in that. He's learned, engaged, generous, humble, and kind, and all this makes him a gifted teacher as well as a gifted poet and a wonderful human being. It's my honor to introduce Oliver de la Paz.
Lynn, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And Porsha, that was an astounding reading. It's a great honor to be up here with my fellow artists, Porsha and Paloma. And gratitude to the folks who make FOC happen, David, Dustin, Hannah, Miracle. All of you are amazing. Oh, Chandra, of course. Thank you, Chandra, for reminding me. I am going to set my timer because I'm going to be one of those weirdos who is going to forget where they are at any space or time. And I'm not going to set its timer. Okay. That was lovely, Lynn. Thank you so much. And thank you to my cohort. You have been amazing. I'm going to read a bunch of dad poems. Apologies. So Lynn mentioned that I was raised in Ontario, Oregon, and if you imagine this is Idaho and this is Oregon, Ontario is right here on this knuckle, and it's best known for being adjacent to the Snake River and its maximum security prison. Much of my work takes place in the West, and it is obsessed with the West as a place of excitement and newness, and also fraught with all sorts of dangers. This first poem is entitled Meditation with Smoke and Flowers. And just one thing that you need to know, so when my wife and I moved to Washington State for a teaching appointment, we moved to a town called Deming, Washington, and it was you know where Deming is? That's cool. So it was adjacent, the house was adjacent to land owned by the Department of Natural Resources. And within a year of our owning the house, they clear-cut 30 acres. I was pissed. But this is a poem about that. Meditation with Smoke and Flowers. It is Monday, and I'm not thinking of myself. My son asleep in his stroller, the dark conifers holding nothing but their scent. I'm walking him to the place where loggers have cleared 30 acres, leaving only ash and stripped tree limbs. The light now comes to the places once dark, and now wildflowers, where once the moss grew thick and complete. The flame of something around the corner, and I'm thinking of the wild tiger lilies that line this gravel road below my house, how they clump together, their stems bent down from the weight of their flowers, how mouth-like they are, and how their speechlessness makes this road quieter. Each flower is a surprise, like the flaming tip of cigarettes in the dark. I think that the road cannot contain all these mouths, though there are mythologies held in check by the tongue, like the story my father told me about his father in wartime, and how his own father forced him, with the threat of a beating, to go under the house for a cigarette from a Japanese foot soldier, bunkered down. I can see my father's small, trembling hand outstretched to this man, whose face is mud-caked, smelling slightly of fire and lubricant for his rifle. The smoke from the soldier's own cigarette takes the shape of into nothing but charcoal. The wreck of everything is a vacuum. So too, the wreck of a village after war, or the floorboards above a son's head in fear of his own father. Here, though, there's nothing to fear. The wheels of the stroller on gravel is the only sound, and the idleness of the excavation trucks hearkens to someone asleep in the uneasy dark. No, I'm not thinking of myself. I'm thinking of an agreement my father must have made with himself years ago, when the houses were burning into bright bouquets in the nighttime. How, perhaps, he swore he would not beat his own son, while somewhere in the afterlife his own father smokes and paces. Perhaps there are no flowers in that place. Perhaps the lone soldier, through with hiding, crawled out after the guns had stopped, then dusted himself off, the sun striking his face with its unreasonable light. I'm thinking of my son, asleep, and of the wild tiger lilies, how frail they are in this new light, why they come, why they spring up unannounced, as suddenly as the promises we make with ourselves when we are young. So I'm going to read a whole bunch of poems from this book. In 1972, we left the Philippines. My uncle on my father's side was blacklisted by the Marcos regime. My father, who was the breadwinner of the family at the time, paid for his education. And my uncle was one of the participants of a lot of student uprisings who were opposed to, of course, the Marcos martial law, declaration of martial law. And so we ended up in 1972 floating between states, moving here and there and crisscrossing the United States. And this is a poem about my father seeing Ontario, Oregon for the first time. Diaspora Sonnet with my father in the desert, seeing the valley before him and nothing else. I imagined him to be God, seeming to birth a spring wind which rattled our mobile of spoons. Did he unearth books to guide us to this moment? And having read the books, their taboos and their secrets, did he hide their possible romances? And did he save nothing in his pockets save justice and disaster, unpardoned by the creases in my palm? And having had his hands framed by a racket of bone, did the wreck of their meat tell us how to receive the wild fields? Did these systems, complicit in however we push through, have answers despite my father's outrage. So the sonnet, why the sonnet? So I was a student of Wanda Coleman in the 1990s. Wanda Coleman was at the time writing a whole huge series of poems called the American Sonnets. And they were amazing, they were improvisational, they were irreverent, they were jazz-like, and they were sonnets, question mark. And I wanted to use the sonnet as a type of argument. The things that happen in these sonnets are unresolved, they're broken. They're broken because they don't have voltus. They don't have a turn, they don't have a change or direction. And that was sort of the state of being a new immigrant, not having resolutions. One of our first houses in our sojourn was a house so terrible that there were hundreds of dead birds that we found. And this is a poem about that. This is entitled Diaspora Sonnet, Nesting in a Chimney. We said that love proliferated the way chimney swifts burrowed into the old attic insulation. We measured their generosity, and their cries increased. We heard them in the day and called them our singers. We could not index them. Their service chiseled through the drywall, and then they'd rush through our living spaces, owning it all. We had rice, we had shirts, we had a roof with a choir. The long gush of their collective, full of thirst and want, their calls cut through the ceiling, the gears of a machine that had already dug a long furrow into our seams. So while we were traveling across the United States and trying to figure out what to do as my mother was relearning to become a doctor. She had already been a doctor in the Philippines, but she had to sort of recertify in all of these things. And while that was happening, they were taking on odd jobs. My mom served as a short order cook for a little bit. And this is a poem about that. Diaspora sonnet with a walk and a broken vent and nothing else. My mother soaked her aching feet because the disrepair of workdays left her rooted. Those hours in the broken care of bosses, smoldering burners, poorly vented and oily. Grease-spotted floors, kitchens booming loud with argumentative oven vents. Her ears went deaf on this continent. No shelter or cover, no paved road home, no quarter given. No skin, just bone. It took me years to wash the smell from me, fry grease. Her skin bore the hard calluses of work, and I know what else it took. Years to wash the stories from her mind, the months to save what's left of her aspirational self. Thanks. Thank you. So there are not just sonnets in here, but there are also pantoums. And the pantoum form, which I love, I wanted to put the pantoum in here and be strategic with it because the pantoum is originally a Malaysian form. It was originally a choral form. It was a form that was shared by, the village, the people, before it was borrowed by the French. And so the form that you're going to hear is the French version. And if you're not familiar with the pantoum, it's basically a series of interlinking lines. So the second line and the fourth line become the first and the third line of the next stanza, and so on and so forth, so that it sort of loops and it forms a circle. Pantoum beginning and ending with thorns. Because of the way a border on a map twists into thorns, my father stood in line in a ruined country with ruined men. We were footnotes on charred parchment, the boundaries lost at the precipice of a war shifting on the hour and spliced histories. My father stood in line in a ruined country with ruined men, and what for? Did he imagine the desert he would bring us to? At the precipice of a war shifting on the hour and spliced histories, the call to leave home throbbed inside him. Urgent pulses. And what for? Did he imagine the desert he would bring us to? Its thirsty and abandoned towns. There was a fire spreading within. The call to leave home throbbed inside. Urgent pulses crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. In thirsty and abandoned towns, there was a fire spreading within, so he took us away because the country was ruled by swords which crossed and uncrossed like tributaries on freshly inked maps. And the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints. He took us away because the country was ruled by swords and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins, and the guns would sound all night like feast days of saints. But really, there was more silence. There was worry and fear, and men emblazoned with chevrons and pins would draw black X's over places they'd conquered. Really. Then more silence. Then worry and fear. The flies would sing their hymnals in procession around the dead, the black X's over places now conquered, maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn, the flies singing their hymnals in procession around the dead, and my father with a ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Maps of provinces, cities, family lines drawn and redrawn into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night. Like my father with a ticket to flee because home wouldn't let us stay. Hum of the plane engine, hum of idling car, hum of the outboard motor, into travelogues and diaries, into stories passed in the night. We were footnotes on a charred parchment, the borders lost to the hum of planes, of idling cars, hum of the outboard motor, because of the way the line on a map twists into thorns. Thank you. So my father, who has a tremendous amount of PTSD, is obsessed with guns. And we in Ontario, Oregon, and you can imagine is gun culture. And so he wanted to fit in, and he purchased a number of guns. This is a poem about that. It's entitled Diaspora Sonnet on My Father's Guns. My father's rifle is a house of sorts. Its nerves are blunted, cold beneath the steel, and rooms echo with reports of noise, loud and boisterous hailstones, not bullets. The thing we flee from, rain and nature. The rifle makes a poor roof. He holsters it to him in fear of his body and the pains of imperatives from another country. The shelter's flimsy and flecked with sparks, ash and fireworks on display, July, dark to light. The open sky blooming bouquets, my father's bewilderment. There are ghost lights seared into what had been seen, a weight as heavy as the gun my father cradles. I've got maybe 3 more poems. Diaspora Sonnet with my father in the off hours. The workers hum to while away afternoons, and tenants chide their sons to sweep from room to room last night's dust motes, stirred dreams entangled in wide streaks of light that, in the daytime, bloom, unsparing, bright like operatic high notes, pierced and round. The clouds of sleep fill with sound, and father, whistling his tune, leans against his broom and listens to men complain about their lives and each other. Brushstrokes wave away the dirt, losses, tunes so deep within the brain we cannot help but weep as sons push brushes past door after door, locked tight like shut eyes and tombs. Hear their quiet bristles, their heavy score. Thank you. I'm going to, as I mentioned, two more. So my father is from the town of Marikina, Metro Manila, and they make shoes there. That is neither here nor there. I just wanted to say that. But this is a poem about that. Diaspora Sonnet, imagining my father on the streets of Marikina, Metro Manila. My father in his 20s wears his pressed suit and carries a small hat box possessing something sensible, something pleased with itself. And through the cacophony of the queued up industry of men coming home from work, my father is plain. Avenues of dust and motor trikes belch in umbrage to the poem of it. We might have stayed. My plain father, tired of the staccato of each adjectival commute, loamy, worn, blunted, and angry, plain as the possibility of wonder in a hat box, as sensible as the need to leave the country. He is the center of sense, my father, never hesitating to thread his Windsor knot and polish his one pair of dress shoes, because he will wear his hat, he will go, and thereafter we will live in his thereafters. And thank you. And I'm going to close with this poem. Diaspora Sonnet, imagining my father putting away his suits because there's no place to go. The fact that love was what had brought us here still registers against my father's loss, a pact he made when he was only years removed from primary, and still the costs are ghostly stops and starts that drift amid his daily oaths. Sometimes he'd pause to brush the soot from cigarette ash. Formalistic and pomaded, the straight-legged pantsuit plush with the promise of love born from abroad. Such elegant clothes, the best he could pack. And how he glistened with promise, well shod, his left and right now burdened steps, manic with worry now. My beautiful father, under the heavy calculus of what's after. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver, for sharing your work with us. Finally, for our last reading, I would like to invite one of Paloma's students, Ryan Lalonde, to the stage to introduce Paloma. It looks like maybe Ryan wasn't able to make it. So. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I am happy to say that Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas is an artist, educator, and activist based in Austin, Texas. Their art practice, which expands from print media into installation, as well as social and collaborative practices, works at the intersection of migration, queerness, and ecology. Barhaugh-Bordas has exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo exhibitions at the Print Shop LA, Handworker Gallery, Buffalo Artist Studios, and Sediment Arts. Artist residencies include Casa Lu Mexico City, Acre, Women's Studio Workshop, the Institute for Electronic Arts at Alfred University, MI Lab in Japan, and Kala Art Institute. Please welcome Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas.
Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate that. Thanks so much, everyone. Give me 1 second because we have to do some magic coordination with 2 screens. But thankfully, I'm an educator who somehow made it through COVID, so this doesn't stress me out at all. All right. One thing that does stress me out a little bit is that because of the light in here, you're not going to get the greatest view of the color in my work, and some of it that will maybe like be distracting for me. I might gripe about it a little bit. But listen, I just remade my website. It was really hard, and you should go look at it. And then you can see on your very own device what the colors are like and all that. First of all, thank you so much, Falk, for having me back. This is the highlight of my year. I love coming here. The community is wonderful, especially the coordinators and all that goes into making this an opportunity for educators to be creative in what they bring to Falk and to the participants, and to share in a moment where people are really being generous with themselves, and that reverberates out into the community that we create. I'm just very grateful for it. And I'm also really impressed by the staff here who showed up like so fresh-faced right after their gala, which looked super fun on Instagram. So yeah, all right, I'm Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas. Let me scoot this even more. I'm gonna read for a little bit and then go into more improvisational talking about a piece that I've been working on for the last year that I'm pretty excited about. Typically, I call this talk Nothing Comes Without Its World. This is a quote from the ecofeminist scholar Donna Haraway. I've been thinking a lot about this phrase because it's deeply meaningful to me, and it also like holds a lot of like places to unpack. But I think that the idea of place and identity and how those two things are linked and how we can build identity within place is becoming just such an intense conversation right now, that I want to kind of like inform how I've titled this talk with the context of what we have on our hands right now, to the best of my ability. But I think that what I take away from that phrase, nothing comes without its world, is that idea of place and identity as being inseparable. So to give you a little bit of background about the world I come with and how this path has impacted my art practice in particular, I'll say that I'm a first-generation American on my mother's side. She and her 7 siblings left Nicaragua on a banana boat in the 1950s. The family landed in Tampa, Florida, and began to make a life. My abuela changed all of her children's names from Spanish to English, which is like, yeah, I think that that's a really easy way to understand what assimilation is. And enrolled all of the young ones in school. My grandmother was a cleaning lady and also worked in the cafeteria so that her kids could go to Catholic school. From my mother's journey, I inherited an experience shared by many immigrant families from Central and South America, where one's culture of origin is rejected in favor of assimilation and the promise of upward mobility, a good American life. My mother was the first in her family to go to college, but it's a hard bargain. She didn't relearn Spanish until she was out of her parents' house. She did change her name back. And she spent her professional career rebuilding Latinidad, that community that comes with the culture of her origin. I don't know as much about my father's family. He's Norwegian, of Norwegian descent by way of Wyoming. So I'm half Nicaraguan and half Norwegian, or as my dad calls me, Norwawan. To return to Haraway's words, if nothing comes without its world, then how do immigrants and the displaced and people like me with a lot of intersections orient themselves? This is a question for most Americans. How do we tell stories, build worlds, and weave communities together on this colonized continent? All right, I'm a maker, and so I address these questions through my art practice. It's really hard to follow up these people who are so exceptional with words, who I honor so much, but also I do that with imagery. Like I find words limited, and so I use images, and it's the opposite. I love it. But that's how I deal with these questions that are like really foundational for me. My cultural blend makes me curious. I'm in between and inquisitive. I don't have a homeland per se, and that's a sticky word that I hope to bring some non-binariness as I bring non-binariness to it as I unpack it. When I read Nothing Comes Without Its World, I find an antidote to the areas of friction and collision that eat away at social and ecological connection. particularly the generational trauma that results from leaving your ancestral lands and shedding your culture, language, and traditions. I learned to connect to place by observing what grows in a place, looking at the contours that shape the land around me and the history, not just human, but the history of living beings that define a place. Some of this actually began by traveling through the eastern seaboard a lot and noticing how much land there had been clear-cut and being just kind of blown away by it. I'm from Colorado. The Rockies have been entirely clear-cut, but I wouldn't know that. I mean, the pine, it's like dense with forest. Every now and then you come across a really old big tree and it's so gnarly that they didn't cut it down. It's like, that's the one that got left. So I'm looking for these histories, not just human, but the history of living beings that define a place. So this talk sort of revolves around, and sort of, because we're going to talk a lot about quilts today, but my print work and ideas that like never leave my studio or my mind is a phrasing that I borrow from the Chicana scholar and poet Gloria Anzaldúa. She talks about a willingness to be between. That's an approach that is part of my life, and I'm very persistent about it. So I spend my time teaching and making art. These are my unique gifts that I hope to share. And by doing that, I plan and try to build the culture, community, and sense of belonging that I'm looking for. Teaching and making are also areas where I'm most able to be myself, which is to say, a person between. It's not firm ground, it's more of a quilt, a net, a web. Okay, so really briefly, I'm a trained printmaker, and I'm most at home in print shops. I love that artists bring information to print shops, and then they start making meaning through the process. We're over working in the Rizzo studio and pulling images apart by color and putting them back together, and through that translation, gaining information. Other characteristics of printmaking that are really important to me are pressure, dissemination, accessibility, and the matrix. That's right. Printmaking as a medium is inextricably linked to advocacy, empowerment, dissent, and democracy. Over time, I've drawn on that legacy, sometimes more heavily than others, but at every step of the way, I carry this history of print within my work. It may not be on the surface, but it's there with me. I treasure that history and that world that printmaking comes with, and my predecessors. So this is some work that, this is some work that I think illustrates some of those topics I was talking about a little bit more. It's a series called Understory that I began numerous years ago, I guess we say before COVID. And it was a practice of looking for non-dominant narratives through the ecological world and nature around me. And my practice for doing that was guided and sort of like principled by trying to understand looking with the female gaze. What did that mean? I didn't really know, but I understood that it could be an approach for making the work, a question that guided me, and it wasn't simply positioning myself in opposition to the male gaze, but learning to see differently. And I think that like as opening that up became something more familiar, things like looking with the queer gaze, the non-binary gaze, or even like the interstitial gaze became interesting to me too. I love asking questions that you really can't answer. So Understory began in upstate New York, not too far from here, and something that was really important to me was the seasons that I was working there. I right now live in Texas, and I'm trying to scheme my way into living in upstate New York during the summers for obvious reasons, right? But also I made this work in upstate New York, and driving around there, being back in that space and time when these exact plants were starting to sprout and come up was like so, I felt it in my body because I spent so much time working with all of these plants, looking at, all of them are invasive species, or like, that's what we call them. Are they invasive? Did we bring them there? Are they noxious? Are they predatory? I mean, the language that we use to describe non-native plants is a little bit strange and aggressive, and it's not so different than how we describe people. So I think that metaphor is really helpful for me because I'm interested in plants and I accept that I don't know that much about them, and I really lean into that. I'm not trying to understand their intended uses or impose a value on them. I don't use nomenclature. Those are kind of like human-centered ways of looking at plants. I will say that it's always funny to me to think about this work and remember that I was considering like what would happen if I was making art for plants, like they're the audience. Like, does this plant know it's going to become art about plants for plants? So just a little bit of plant humor in there for you. Okay, so I also really like I love working with machines. Printmaking is big on like machine mediation. You're always collaborating with the mechanisms in the print shop, wherever you are. I like to misuse or use equipment for non-intended purposes. So if there's a way to do something really directly and accurately, I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I can push the print button, but like, what if I try to screw it up or create a glitch or outsmart the machine? And in this slide, I'm using the plant to outsmart the machine, the plant to outsmart it. So it's a scanner, and the scanner bed is supposed to scan things that are flat, but I'm holding in 3 dimensions because a plant is doing its thing in 3 dimensions, and it creates an interesting glitch. All right, so that's sort of like a foundation of like work that has been pretty significant to me, but we should probably talk about the fact that in the last 10 years, I have moved 5 times. And so like making art is always like getting disturbed, and I have to find my practice again, and it's really kind of like, I don't know how I've done it. Hopefully I can stay in Texas. Everybody pray for me. Anyway, things have gotten like, they go where I find it easiest to make things sometimes. When you move to a new place and everything is destabilized, but the thing that grounds you is that you know that you need to make things, and you know that like that is what helps you re-find yourself. I start looking for the lowest boundaries, the lowest thresholds, like what's gonna make me want to make art. And some of that has included working in more craft-oriented ways and with fabric and weaving. So the reason I've moved so many times is because I'm a professor and I have been going where jobs are. So yeah, not because I wanted to. Okay, and I'm very grateful for my job. I love teaching and I love making art. I also love making these weavings. So these are 2 works in progress, WIP. This was, I sort of like had this idea of like, I really want to see what it's like to weave paper. It sounds sort of stupid and like it's going to take a really long time and be frustrating. I'm in. And I was also curious about hidden labor in things. That's something that I'm like always wanting to work on, is like things that you can't tell how long they took or how much expertise, but yet if you meet the one person who knows, you two are bonded forever. These ones began with tracing some poetry and making drawings and then just experimenting. The following ones are made with graphite rubbings and cyanotype. So the process started to sort of like, what is it called when something like opens like an iris, started to like spiral out into other material for making. I was doing an artist residency in Mexico at the time, and I'm not a Mexican, that's not my lineage, so I wanted to go there and be a productive artist, but I didn't want to be extractive, and that's sort of a curious question for an artist, because we use a lot of material, and we can be drawing from a source, but we are also generative, we're gift givers, we're like part of building culture. But one way that I decided in sort of a material sense to try and be more generative rather than extractive was to use printmaking processes that were like the lightest impact. So graphite rubbings are just showing the membrane of like the paper membrane of what was between the graphite and the surface behind it. and cyanotypes are made with the sun, and you're seeing the absence of what was on the surface and made. And both of those have a front and a back, and you don't see what's there. Half of the weaving is obscured behind what is showing on the other side. I've also started working a lot with fabric and creating what I call flags. These are also cyanotypes, so when you see the color on your phone later when you're poring over my website, it's a really, really seductive blue color. I would take little pieces of these cyanotype coated fabrics and expose them on walks that I would take around the city, and then just kind of shove them back in a bag and open them up later. What I love about making these things is sometimes when you get good at something, it becomes pretty labored. I think that actually happens with a lot of printmaking processes or craft processes. Like the first time you do it, it's really fun because you feel so fresh at it that every choice you make is sort of a surprise. When I get good at something, I usually start to try and refine my own like physical working process to become more like a machine so that I do it exactly the same each time and make no mistakes. Anyone familiar with this? Like you try to just like be really control all the variables, but like there's not a lot of humanity in that. It's sort of the opposite. And sewing and making these cyanotypes is more of an improvisation to me. I'm not quite a painter. Paintbrushes aren't really my medium, but like needle and thread, that's a way of drawing for me. And also creating things with light, creating things that are impression-based and have a little bit of mystery in how they're made feel a lot more like improvisational and responsive painting. So these flags are also kind of my way of like looking at the world and thinking, I don't know, that like, I also looked around the room today and realized there's a lot of us wearing red, white, and blue, or maybe it's just the teachers. And there's something about like, our iconography of flags and like wanting to belong somewhere, even when you have a really hard time with what's going on in that place, that is starting to like percolate to the surface for me. I like making flags because I think you can make them for any sort of thing, and they can be a flag, they can be a banner, and they can like just emanate positivity in the kind of place that you've sourced them from. This piece has fabric from many different places that I've traveled and made art. The weaving that is lining the left side of it is the first weaving I ever made. It's pretty terrible, but I kept it around for a really long time. And then all of a sudden when I was making this flag, I suddenly knew where that weaving belonged, which is a beautiful moment. Ooh, I'm getting close on time. How are we doing? Everybody's energy okay? We're gonna get into the quilt. It's so exciting. Okay, so when I moved to Texas, I realized I needed to make something that felt really good to make, that even when I was really exhausted from teaching, I could go home and still had the energy for. For me, that's sewing. I couldn't control the things that were happening in the world, and they were so overwhelming, but I felt that something I knew that I needed and wanted and felt like I could contribute to was an object for care, connection, and healing. And I love making quilts, but this one felt like kind of heavy, maybe weighted. So this is an example of all the tests that I started making in order to figure out how to make this quilt. I made monoprints, I made panels. Eventually, I made drawings. And over Thanksgiving, I went home and my stepmom said, "You have some kimonos to look at. They were your grandmother's, her mother. And this bright blue kimono was part of them." And I suddenly realized, like, oh, all these colors were just telling me to go red, and this blue is there to be a part of it. So this quilt has become a really important way for me to build community, quite literally. I have quilting circles at my house. I have invited people who are like me, because there aren't that many, but in Texas there are quite a few. So mixed race people, queer Latine people, non-binary people. I started small, invited them to come help me quilt, and Opal really loves hanging out on the quilt also. It's her favorite place. The next iteration of this is, here's one of the quilting circles, and the two women are literally telling each other a secret while it's happening. And then that is the quilt in my, there's actually 2 of these quilts because I was commissioned to make one after the first one has its own show, its own solo show in spring. So the second one I just finished, but that's a photo of it in my studio. And in the morning light, it just turns the whole room pink. So this idea of like creating something that could hold energy or emanate energy or like serve to do something that is beyond your capacity as an individual is like, it's kind of amazing to see the things that you don't expect happen. That's the first quilt for connection, care, and healing. And when you look at it with a little bit better contrast, it vibrates, and I like to say it's so pretty it hurts. The back of it is cochineal dyed, and the hand quilting on it is in the shape of concentric circles that look like crop circles. As I was making this, I was thinking about all my travel, seeing family all over the US. I would fly home to Denver and you see this patchwork of land that's completely confounding. You're like, I don't get how humans did that to the land, to go back to clear cutting. But yeah, it's like perfect squares. It's like a quilt. And then you have these strange crop lines where the water is hitting whatever crop is growing there. And this was my way of like thinking about that. So that's it for me. Although I will say when I was making this today, I was like, that would be awesome as a rezo. So I'll be printing some of these and come by for open studios. Maybe I'll have some out. I have no idea how they'll turn out, but hopefully pretty interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It gets me very excited to see what all your students will be creating for Thursday night. So with that, I would like to invite our poets and artists to come to the stage for a joint Q&A. Anybody who would like to ask a question, the way we do it is you'll just raise your hand, and we'll wait for Miracle to come and bring you the microphone to ask the question. So yeah, with that, we would kick it off. Would anybody have the first question? Oh my gosh. Oh yes, over here. Miracle. Oh, here we go. Wait for the microphone. There you go.
Got it. Didn't know I had a mic. Before Paloma, with the invasive species, what were those 2 species that you did work with?
Those were 2 examples. I'm like, can I enunciate? One of them is definitely Japanese knotweed.
Yep.
And then the one on the left, the one that's got a little bit more pokey things, I don't remember, but I do know that paper is made out of purple maiden grass, which is also an invasive species from the same property. This is like paper of the invasive species on the species. A lot of mustard greens, garlic, mustard, garlic. Thank you. Mustard, garlic, a lot of mugwort, and honeysuckle. Tons of that.
Gotcha. Southern bush or Japanese honeysuckle? I'm asking.
I don't know.
Don't know? Okay.
No, I purposefully stay kind of dumb about it. I look at it, I write it down, and then I'm like, it's that plant.
Got it. That's wonderful.
I have a question for all 3 of you. I was wondering if you could speak about your roles as both poet laureates or former poet laureates, and as your role as an educator. I'm wondering what the transition is like from going from the private space as an artist to then being a public artist. If you could speak about that.
Because I'm in the center. Porsha voluntold me to go first. So I am the Poet Laureate of Worcester, which is really strange because I am an introvert. And I hate being in the public, but I feel like one of the things that being the Poet Laureate has taught me is how to change the kind of work that I'm doing to reach different audiences. And I think that you know, the kind of work that I write about political violence, basically. And the city of Worcester often asks me to write occasional poems, oftentimes for dedications and those sorts of things. And so in a lot of ways, I have to stretch myself to do these particular kinds of things, for, you know, to write poems that are accessible, that can be read in certain ways. But every once in a while, I can sort of stitch underneath all of that, you know, my advocacy and my interest in social justice and those sorts of things. So it is a balancing act, but it doesn't necessarily fully change who I am and what my interests are, if that makes sense. Porsha.
That's great. I'm sorry, Miracle. Can you say the question one more time for my brain?
Yeah, I was wondering what it was like to go from the private space of being an artist to going to the public space of being an artist when it comes to your role as being Poet Laureate versus your role as being a writer and a scholar.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for answering it. Yeah, I mean, I think I toy with the question a lot of what it means to be the public versus the private for any artist, right? When we have to like present, that's part of the role. But I've decided recently that most of it is a performance, right? That like walking out into the world and interacting with humans at some point on some level is a kind of performance. And, you know, I just have to turn on that side of my brain that says, you know, that I am still protected, even though I'm, you know, up here given a version of myself or a version of my mother or a version of there's still a different kind of wall, right? And so, yeah, I've just had to be comfortable with knowing when and where and how, and understanding that there is this public sphere that I'm in, and then there is, you know, the private version of me, and that the person who wrote the poem is slightly different than what's happening on stage. And I think more so in the context of laureateship, is really I guess the conflict or the tension came with the notion of being artists sanctioned by the government is really my biggest kind of tussle with institutions and or the government, right? And I was thinking about something Adrienne Rich said, which I'm going to misquote, but I remember she declined some kind of big award, maybe it was the President's Medal, because she just said this is not a place for artists to like really speak their truth. And I've been toying with that a lot. I think similar to what Oliver has said, you know, it's come to the point where I cannot deny the truth, right? I think part of the role of the artist is to speak the truth and to be honest and to write close to the bone. And so I find myself in recent years just constantly testing my personal as political, or like understanding that, you know, it might get a little weird, but I cannot lie. I just can't lie, you know? So whether that means having conversations on City Hall Plaza that are about very difficult topics or things that feel like we have a gag order around, whether that be in the institution or at City Hall, I find myself kind of scared, right? There's something at risk, but also still just very necessary to say the thing.
I'm so grateful for you two in your public positions. It's really wonderful. Thank you. I'm an educator and I do activism, and I will be honest and say that I've only been in Texas for a year, but it's different there. And I have considered doing things like putting on my Instagram that all opinions are my own. It's a sunshine state, so they can look at my communication at any time. They can subpoena it because I work for the state. So on the one hand, I think that you have this, I mean, it's heightened surveillance in a place where you would think, you know, I don't know, not to get too deep in the weeds on politics, but like a hands-off, like independence from the government is like really oddly balanced with like governmental power over things that are your individual life. But I think the grounding force for me is like, one, integrity, and that I have integrity insofar as it impacts my life and people that I think that I am responsible for, like whether it's people who work for me because I have a managerial capacity, or whether it's my students. Like, I really believe that I have a bit of a role in like facilitating some of their freedom of expression and a responsibility to that. What's weird is when we get into the legal things about it. Like, you're not actually battling these things in a courtroom because laws are really strange and weird. So I don't know, I think we all have like both the public and the private, and we're maybe getting back to like taking care of each other as neighbors. So yeah, those are things I think about. And then right now I'm quite honestly, because I'm in the state of Massachusetts, just saying like, I feel kind of scared in general about expressing myself openly in a lot of capacities right now. It's not easy.
And on that note, how do the two of you feel about that? About how do you feel about going for it, just expressing whatever you feel and think about what's going on? Do you have any inhibitions or fears, as Paloma was saying?
It's up to you.
No, you go.
Yeah, I agree. I'm like, I am terrified. And also, I know that moving past the threshold of fear is like how I get to the place that I need to be. You know, that's how I know it matters. When I was writing this poem for this organization, Our Angel, which again is in London, and you know, they have all of these views about America at the time, right now. I think globally, we are unfortunately, for lack of a better term, the shit country that Donald Trump is, you know, calling other places. But they had so many concerns. They were like, well, we want to just re-articulate that this poem is about America. It's not about another place. We want to make sure you feel safe. Are you traveling? You know, they had all of these very specific questions. And I was, in my head, I'm like, I wasn't afraid, but now I am. Like, now I'm really concerned, right? And between you and I, they told me they were going to live stream, not record this. But between us, right, recently I was given a commencement speech about a time I was giving a commencement speech in which I got revoked from giving that speech because a student had said I was pro-Palestine. And so then I got invited this season of graduation to do another one in which I talked about that. And then, you know, had the president of the university reach out to me to ask for a copy of the speech, right? So it feels like a heightened state, and I think it's because it is, right? Everybody's on, kind of like on their P's and Q's, but in a negative way, right? I feel like I'm being surveilled, which I am. That's what's happening. And so it is a little terrifying, but at the end of the day, I'm like, you know, I just have to tell the truth. I couldn't stand in front of my students after, you know, they had experienced what they experienced and say, oh, the flowers are great. You know what I mean? I just couldn't do that, you know? So it is a little terrifying, but at the end of the day, you just have to tell the truth. Or at least I don't know that I could be with myself. I would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I always return to the fact that the arts are getting attacked because they matter. And the arts are, of course, you know, at the center of what is happening is being targeted because, again, it is the place where inquiry formulates. So am I scared? Am I worried? Kinda. I mean, like, I was raised by people who have PTSD. And in their PTSD, they already saw it. They already knew it was coming. They sort of said, well, this is happening. And there's the Nobel laureate, Maria Ressa, who described what is happening to the country as the Filipinization of America. That this is a playbook, and in a lot of ways, you know, we as poets, the unacknowledged legislators, thank you, Shelley, are, you know, in a position where people don't read poetry, and so they don't understand it, and we can talk about it sometimes, right? So I want to say that, yes, I'm worried. Yes, I'm scared. Yes, I have 3 young children at home who I always worry about. But I also know that I wouldn't be me if I didn't write about it. I wouldn't be myself, and so I don't want to not be me, if that makes sense. I think it's important for me to do this. Yeah, it's a way of being.
I think we have time for one final question.
Paloma, you talked about finding the glitch within technology and within like using printing and using things in the wrong way. And I was wondering if you could speak more towards how you manipulate between forms, like when it comes to quilting, like where in your adjustments do you make, like what decisions are you making on the part of creating friction to create symmetry, you know what I mean? And I was wondering if you poets could also speak towards that when it comes to form. Like, are there moments where you're using formal constraints to liberate your poems or liberate the story that your poem or the situation that your poem is trying to explicate? I was wondering if you could speak towards like using constraints as a sort of way to find freedom within your work.
That's a great question. Thank you. For me, so, you know, with quilts, like, you have to sew it so it stays together. And sometimes they're more decorative, and sometimes they're for a bed. And you could, like, really go deeply into that. I think one of the main ways that I avoid making things kind of contrived or, I don't know, like, formulaic is I don't use patterns. And I don't plan things out fully. I make them as I go. Like I'm figuring it out each piece at a time. And with that one, when I decided, did I tell you that I dyed 9 colors of red silk? Yeah, I dyed 9 colors of red silk. Because I was like, oh, it needs to be red silk. And I need to dye that all different colors of red. And then I started piecing them together, and at one point there was like a hot pink part in the middle of the quilt that I was like, it's not working, and I had to somehow take it out and put something else in. That was very much like a painting. That was very much like looking at something, is it done? Oh, it's not. Is this right? No, it's not, until you know that it is. And also figuring out that it needed to be the red quilt took me 3 months of trying different things and like waiting until all the pieces kind of like click in to place and you know what you're doing is the right choice. The stakes felt kind of high with this quilt. Like I really didn't want to screw it up. I knew what its purpose was, and I just had to find the way to get to that purpose. But a friend of mine says that printmaking is all about problem solving. Like you're always just solving problems, doing a better job solving problems each time. So I think that makes me like particularly adept at like coming at something in a self-trained way and then figuring out how to keep doing it in ways that feel both like I'm getting better at it and better at my craft, but also still asking interesting questions. I also love the quilts of Gee's Bend, and they are so perfectly imperfect. It's really incredible.
So I am obsessed with form and patterns, and the biggest part of my interest in form and pattern is that I see pattern and structures of patterns and forms as a type of inquiry, and we've talked a lot about inquiry in my workshops, that through patterns I ask questions. Namely, in the sonnets, in the case of the sonnets, and I talked a little bit about the sonnets, what does the Western form look like in the hands of an immigrant? And how is the sonnet, which is very, very traditional and loaded with symbols, going to change in my hands? And so, you know, I'm often looking at or employing different kinds of forms and formal experiments as a way to sort of challenge narrative or to ask questions about the story that I'm telling. because the story that I'm telling has been often framed within a particular type of structure. So if I disrupt the structure, what is the story going to say? And how do I continue that story in this broken form?
I love that question, Miracle. I feel like I was thinking about that during both of y'all's talk, especially the glitch, and I was just really fascinated with the Diaspora Sonnets, right, and the lack of a turn, or the lack of a turn being a turn in a way. And I had, in my class this week, I don't know if I've been saying this out loud, but I've been screaming it in my head because we've been talking about Jericho Brown's The Tradition. And in an essay, he says, what is a Jericho Brown sonnet? Or what does this sonnet look like? And so I have been screaming that to myself. What does this form look like in my hands? A very similar question. I think for me, I am definitely obsessed with form. And I mentioned the contrapuntal and both the sonnet. But I think another thing that we've been spending a lot of time talking about is just like nonce form, or the invention of a form, right? And I guess what I've been interested in or fascinated with is what kind of form does my obsession want, right? And so if I'm writing about water, what form or unform or reform would water take on, and how can that show up in the poem about water, right? And so I think a lot about like water as a thing that returns or remembers or rearranges or comes back and forth and back and forth. So I've been thinking a lot about how to use form or constraint to really fit the subject at hand, and like also theorizing that each poem, right, has a structure, but each poem could be very specific to its own nonce form or vice versa. So I've been trying to do it in a way that allows the form to kind of create a ghost or spell, an underlying spell in the poem itself.
Big round of applause for our faculty members, Porsha Olayiwola, Oliver de la Paz, and Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas. Remember, Oliver will be signing books at the back of the room, and please check out all the books and merchandise for sale in our bookstore. We will have Porsha's book by Thursday, so you will be able to buy it before you leave. Visit our gallery next door, which is still open, and join us tomorrow for our next amazing faculty talk with writer Garrett Conley, poet Santi Frazier, and photographer David Hilliard. Thank you, and have a great evening.